students! Today we will continue with our discussion about societal security, another way of conceptualizing security in that respect. In the previous session we talked about national security. This was already an original, informative basic framework to understand how our understanding of security can be much broader than state security, so to say the mainstream understanding of state security. And I think societal security today will provide us another perspective, let's say, even much broader perspective with that respect. And this is chapter 9. Before we move on with the content of the chapter, let me introduce you the author as well. This is a chapter written by Tobias Teller in our major textbook. And as I said, it's mainly about the ways in which we can conceptualize security different from mainstream understanding of state security. So within that framework, I would like to focus on the ways in which we can basically explain this concept, define this concept. And this requires us to look at the origins of the concept in that respect. So when we consider, therefore, the societal security, the origins of the concept itself, it's seen that it's originated in Barry Buzan's classic People, State and Fear, and become a cornerstone of what is widely known as the Copenhagen School of International Relations. It's possible to say that for many critics and proponents alike, societal security has become one of the most important challenges to the state-centric and objectivist at the same time conceptions of security in international relations. A partial move, I would say, from the state as an object of analytical and normative concern, a growing focus on identity, as we mentioned in the previous session with national identity and national security dimension of the issue, and more broadly, the rise of social constructivism at the same time as an explanatory paradigm really led to the growth of the term societal security in international relations. But I would say that mostly it originated from the necessity of broadening our perspective beyond the state security. So if I need to remind you once more the way that we conceptualize, how we conceptualize basically, or how we study security in general, let me remind that we were using three main sort of tools to do that. The first one was identifying threats. The second one was identifying referent objects, and the third one was understanding or looking at the ways in which threats can be avoided, or these threats can be avoided or dealt with. So within that perspective, it's seen that here we're trying to discuss alternative referent objects. Because in the mainstream perspective of international relations vis-a-vis security, with regard to security, it was the idea there was that state was the main referent object. In the previous chapter, in the previous session, in chapter 8, national identity was the main referent object. Here it's seen that societal security appears to be, let's say, the main concern. And let's see what we mean. What is the main referent object within that perspective? So it's possible to say that when we consider societal security and state security, traditional approaches to security in IR, they mostly focus on state, as we said. And based on classical definition of state as a legal and political unit exercising sovereignty over a defined territory and population, they assume that a state achieves security if it can protect its sovereignty and territorial integrity. But remember what we said. In fact, the things that we would like to secure would be much broader than the borders of our state, the physical borders of our state. They might be also social borders. They might be also our identity, what we may want to protect, basically. And keeping in mind that understanding, it's possible to say that the main threat to these has traditionally, the main threat to basically state security in mainstream perspective, has traditionally come from the physical force wielded by other states. Conventional approaches to security, therefore, are preoccupied with broadly defined military issues such as deterrence, balances of power, alliance formation, and weapon proliferation. But what about when the issue at hand is beyond physical boundaries? When what you want to protect is not your physical state boundaries, but is your identity? So societal security actually reflects on all these topics, and we will try to discuss them in the upcoming slides. So let me continue with societal security and state security, kind of the comparison between the two. Because of its focus on protecting the state from military threats by other states, this traditional security agenda, what we have already introduced throughout the semester, most of the first few classes of the semester, has paid relatively little systemic attention to what is inside the state. So, what is inside the state, above all to society, defined broadly as the social, cultural, physiological formation, that psychological formation as well as, that the state's political, territorial shell encloses. So, in societal security understanding, therefore, within this much broader encompassing term, we see that it's possible to open up the black box of state and to find out, to realize and to observe what kind of security challenges, what kind of security perceptions there may lie inside of the state, not only with regard to the state itself, almost like a closed black box, but we actually try to elaborate on with the societal security, with concepts like societal security. We try to open up this black box and take a look at, for instance, social, cultural, and psychological formations. So of, let's say, state understanding, psychological formations behind what makes us community, what makes us society, and security threats that we perceive vis-a-vis what resides inside of the state. This is the logical result, or I would say that definitely, this is the logical result of conceiving of the international system as composed of mainly nation-state and of defining nation-state in ideal typical terms as units whose social, cultural, political boundaries coincide. So our traditional perspectives, therefore, were basically the logical result of our general conceptualizations of the international security as mainly composed of nation-states, where each society has its state and each state its society, basically. Societal security defined as the cultural, linguistic, identity survival of a social group becomes the logical extension of state security. So in order to secure basically state, therefore, it's not enough only to secure it in military terms, secure its borders basically. It's also important to secure what is inside of the state. So what makes the society, what sticks society together. So therefore this requires us to understand that security can be also related with cultural security, preserving your cultural values, preserving your linguistic values, preserving your identitative, basically, values. So which value you may wish to preserve, basically, within a society may at later stages may create certain security problems, because anything which you conceive as a threat, which you perceive as a threat towards your value, the value that you want to preserve, may create security challenges inside of the state, not between states, as seen in the mainstream perspective. So, societal security, viewed as the extension of state security, appears to be a very, if you like, plausible argument. So, in that perspective, it's possible to say that, according to that view, in fact, societal security, so preserving your social, psychological, if you like, identitative, if you like, values in that respect, would definitely contribute to your state security at later stages. Or any kind of problems that you face with, any kind of security challenges that you face with regard to your social, psychological, identitative terms, values, would definitely threaten your state security as well, but inside of the state. No other actor, outside actor, basically create that security challenge, but it is sort of created inside of the state. So there are also different approaches, for sure, to societal security, different from the idea, what we let me again turn back to that previous slide. We said at this point that societal security can be viewed as an extension of state security, but of course there are also different perspectives differing from that idea. For instance, in Identity, Migration and New Security Agenda in Europe, and a series of subsequent writings, societal security theorists seek to break with such a view of societal security as a simple extension of state security. And instead, they conceptualize society as a potentially independent security object and societal forces as potential security actors in their own right. So, it's possible to say that society, for societal security theorists, is the social unit, a perceived nation, ethnic group, clan, tribe, or potentially any other communal formation, basically, that provides a locus of identification for its members. And objectively speaking, a society is signified and differentiated from other societies by markers such as language and customs. And subjectively, it is the repository of shared meanings and identifications for its members who share what Karl Dodge terms as we feeling, or what social psychologists refer to as common social identity. So within that perspective, it's possible to say that for societal security theorists, what characterizes every identity community is that its members value its preservation as an end in itself rather than just as a means to achieve other ends. And given that it helps sustain those parts of the self-concepts that are socially rooted. In that sense, it's possible to say that societal security is synonym with kind of identity security for individuals. And this is why I believe our previous discussion about collective identity in the previous session in Chapter 8, while we were discussing Chapter 8, could definitely help us to understand here at this point what we mean identity becoming such an important issue area with respect to security, and how preserving our identity as a value basically may turn out to become a main referent object at certain points, and how policies can be developed at the same time in order to avoid such, let's say, security challenges created as a result of, identity formations. So it's possible to say that, in short, societal security signifies the ability of an identity community to survive. And in Olive Weber's often cited definition, it refers to the sustainability within acceptable conditions for evolution of traditional patterns of language, culture, association, and religious, and as well as national identity and custom. Let me try to provide you some examples for identity threats after this brief overview of how we can conceptualize identity and how we can conceptualize societal security. So, in different societal contexts, the same type of objective development triggers very different perceptions and reactions for sure. For example, Austrian voters may feel more threatened by immigration than their counterparts in Luxembourg, even though Luxembourg has proportionally many more foreign trade residents, for instance, than does Austria. Or French elites may worry more about the spread of English language, for instance, than the Dutch elites. And even though English is used much more widely in Netherlands in compared to France and so on. So it's important to understand the roots, the basis, so to say, in terms of, while we try to look at all these and try to understand all these security challenges basically perceived by different nations or different groups in that respect, we need to understand the roots. We need to really understand the collective identity formation process, so to say, so that we can trace back and find out why certain matters are perceived to be as security challenges or security threats and not the others, basically. Further examples. It's possible to say that actual or aspiring state elites may seek to construct, for instance, societal threat perception as a vehicle to further their own position at some points. For instance, the use of anti-immigration, and more recently, especially this kind of emerged as an anti-Muslim propaganda. Such themes by various right of center parties in Europe is a very good example to find out how states sometimes may also securitize some issues so that they can come up with extreme policy measures vis-a-vis what they perceive as threat, as certain security threats. Another example is the switch by, let's say, several communist leaders in Central and Eastern Europe to adopt more xenophobic nationalist themes in the early 70s and 80s in an attempt to compensate, actually, communism's fading economic and political appeal in Eastern Europe. So xenophobic nationalist themes, for instance, were used at that moment as a tool, so to say. So it's possible, this is to say, it's possible to securitize also some issues, some issue areas, if extreme measures are desired to be taken. So state, and when we basically take a look at, when we move beyond to that and take a look at state and societal boundaries, it's seen that most of the time they're actually overlapping. Insecure societies may call on their states for protection, for instance. For example, many accounts, this happened in the European Union from the 1990s onwards, as some national electorates opposed further European integration on the grounds of wanting to protect their national identities from supranational enrichment, while most states' elites supported it for economic and for political reasons. The above scenario actually, it puts forward that states and societal boundaries, they broadly coincide at most of the time. It's also possible to say that, in fact, state and societal boundaries may sometimes not be overlapped ones, and even they may develop in a more antagonistic manner, in a more antagonistic way vis-a-vis each other. So many states under that, let's say, categorization are internationally divided into different societal units, be they self-conceived nations, ethnic communities it might be, or cultural or linguistic subgroups. So in such situations, societal security and state security can become mutually antagonistic. On the one hand, state institutions may seek to promote internal cohesion by trying to assimilate minority cultures into the dominant state-sponsored societal culture, whereas on the other hand, many minority groups may seek to ensure their cultural and identity survival by demanding a state of their own. And these demands, they often increase as attempted assimilation at the hands of central state elites, which increases their basically societal insecurity. So it's possible to say that as an example to what we what we attempted to describe in terms of antagonistic sort of state-societal boundaries formation, it's possible to say that a desire by insecure societies to obtain their own states contributed, among other things, the disintegration of Yugoslavia and Soviet Union in 1990s. So when you have so many, if you like, differing ethnic groups, religious groups, linguistic, cultural, if you like, divisions among certain groups within the society, at that point, creating a cohesion, so to say, internal cohesion, promoting an internal cohesion would be the main challenge for the unity of the state. So this is to say that unity of the state may be under threat as a result of those differing antagonistic state-societal boundaries, so to say, within the state. So as you may see, we're still looking at inside of the state. So we're not talking about any security threats which are stemming from outside of the state, which are stemming from which are resulted from, for instance, we are not talking about tensions which are resulted from any, if you like, relations with other states or other actors, other units within the international system. We're trying to look at and understand what is taking place inside of the state when unity is weak, for instance, when internal cohesion is not as at the level as it is anticipated. How the ways in which this can basically create security challenges is the main point that we try to understand with this chapter, societal security chapter. So let's also talk about how to overcome identity conflicts. It's possible to say that 3 complementary strategies may help to overcome zero-sum constellations with regard to the issue at hand. So, promoting, for instance, an overarching statewide societal identity that is complementary rather than competing with subunit societal identities would be one of them. A federal arrangement that grants far-reaching cultural autonomy to the societal subunits in exchange for political loyalty to the state would be another one. Desecuritizing, for instance, the threat posed by state to societal identities in the ways further discussed below, by strengthening internal cohesion, can be also a way to basically overcome identity conflicts which may erupt within the state, inside of the state. So, to conclude that part, it's possible to say that societal security theorists, they always seek to fashion the widely held notion that identity somehow matters in international relations into a more coherent theoretical framework that shows how, why, and when this can be so. And as the present chapter, as the present discussion on societal security indicates, this has the potential to help us to better understand the phenomena in international relations that economic or strategic explanations alone cannot adequately account for, ranging from the collapse of Yugoslavia and the Soviet Union to the rise of xenophobic movements in Western Europe and resistance as well as in international integration. So, I would like to provide you with some further questions if you like, for just some food for thought, for your further analysis, for your further understanding, or for your elaboration on the topic. It's possible to list, as I said, 5 questions. The first one appears to be this: why should we assume that people strive for societal security, and why should we presume that they place the defense of their communal identities ahead of other aspirations, let's say, like economic ones? So what makes identity issues, mostly social identity issues, quite, if you like, important? This is, in some more simple terms, this is to ask what makes identity matters extremely important. When and why societal security matters to people and shapes their behavior in particular ways. I would say that this is mostly during the times when you have a threat, you perceive a threat towards your own identity. Just some ideas for further discussion. Why people construct group boundaries and identity with groups, how dynamics inside groups shape relations between them and vice versa, and how and why people perceive particular developments as threatening to their group identity. All these questions matters a lot in today's world, I would say, in the 21st century, at a time when we have serious identity conflicts, when we still have unresolved identity issues, unresolved conflicts mostly stemming from identity issues. It's important, all these indicates the significance, the importance of understanding the, let's say, the necessity of internal cohesion, the necessity of creating more tolerable, if you like, identities, which can, let's say, coexist together at the same time. And as mentioned earlier, there would be various ways of doing that. I mean, ranging from federal structures to some other measures which can be taken to strengthen the cohesion in general. But I think at the end of the day, it really relates to empathy and understanding each other. Thank you very much for joining me today for the societal security session. Next sessions, we will continue with regional and global security challenges in the 21st century world politics. Thank you very much.